Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Hello, hello. Awesome. Can everyone hear me and see the slides?
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for joining, everybody. So today we'll be talking a little bit about personalization of LLMs, my experience kind of working at Amazon. And yeah, so we'll dive in. So a little bit about me. I graduated from the University of Washington, so proud Husky. I majored in business at Foster. I did IS and mathematics, and I did an internship in my last year. That was as a business analyst. I spent the last or the first year and a half after graduating, returned to Amazon. I role changed to data scientist role, was in that role for about 1 year, and then since then, working as a data scientist too for about the past half of a year. And our team is AGI information, so we focus on two main dimensions, personalization and learning. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in future slides. But yeah, and had to sneak Jeff in there. So cool, cool. So a brief overview of like the contents I'm going to try to cover today is just to give you a survey of like what is personalization of LLMs, um, what is some of the like the main taxonomy of usage, what is personalization data and memories, what are some different like techniques to personalize, and then also we'll talk about kind of a more recent kind of methodology that has gained a lot of attention. So that would be synthetic data generation. What is it? What are some of the core components related to that? Personas and role-playing language agents. And then the second half, we'll kind of talk more about my personal experience working at Amazon, more about the culture, the different types of data roles, what you might expect from working as a data scientist, and ending with some more tips, reflections, or general lessons learned. So to start off, what is personalization? I'm not going to read this entire definition, but the whole goal here is like how can we cater a system's response to the unique invocations of a person? So based on what we know about you, the things that you like, the things that you're passionate about, or different user groups even, how can we actually improve user satisfaction by kind of tailoring the response and curating the response towards like who you are, right? So I thought I would share a quick recent kind of exciting launch announcement, but we at AGI we work closely with the Alexa team, right? So recently we launched Alexa Plus, which is like the improved Alexa powered by like generative AI. And so I thought it'd be cool to kind of start with like a quick demo or example of some of this like in the real world and specific to Amazon. So for this video.
Yeah, Doug, I think we're missing the volume on the video.
Okay. Um, so you didn't hear any of that?
No.
It's like um okay, I can try to summarize. Basically, they were talking about like advertising as a personal assistant, right? So some of the things that were in that kind of like quick demo were, hey, like give me dinner recommendations, right? And it was like, oh, Susan's like pescatarian, or this family member likes this cuisine or something like that. And you can actually sort of see that the assistant's personalizing the response based on the information that it knows about you. So this is like a real world application and trying to utilize some of the user specific data to kind of enhance and personalize the actual like systems response. All this. Cool. So would like to talk a little bit about like how is this all actually happening behind the scenes? So we can start with maybe like a quick high level taxonomy of LLM personalized usage. So there's been this growing interest, right? How can we kind of go from that paradigm shift of like general LLM responses to general information seeking queries to actually really trying to enhance the response and better personalize to a user or user group. And I really like this breakdown from the survey where they kind of decompose it into two main use cases. So one is the actual like personalized text generation. And then the other one is leveraging the LLMs for personalization in downstream applications. So you can kind of see on this diagram here, what's happening is like the user might have a general input query X. And this is a simple like RAG-based framework. But we also have like a user corpus of data. This could be like past raw interactions, historical interactions, different attributes you might store in a database, different documents that they've uploaded themselves manually. And then based on the input query, it might go some kind of like query generation function if you want to augment it further. But all you're going to do is retrieve the K most, relevant items from that corpus of data that you have about the user. And then with the relevant inputs, you're going to pass it back into your general language model M and generate what we're calling here Y hat, or a actual personalized enhanced response. And the other thing here is that like this output can then feed directly into um, the next kind of use case or downstream task use case. So you can either take the raw output as it is, you can maybe also embed it, you can kind of augment it with further like task specific information, and then feed it into a general task model. So you can think about recommender systems, and that's like the primary use case. But when you're asking for like movie recommendations or restaurant recommendations, it can kind of take in that information. And what I kind of like about this taxonomy or breakdown is that you can kind of see the connection between the two use cases. And really, you can have like even another arrow based on ideally, you'll have better recommendations. You get better interaction data or engagement, like clicks or purchases, watch time, and that will feed back into improving your user corpus, right? So there's sort of like this positive like flywheel effect, whereas you kind of improve on the personalized generation output, that will improve maybe your recommender system. As you improve the recommender system, you get better quality interaction data, more engagement, and that will kind of cycle back and improve the user corpus. So next, I want to like briefly overview like what are some of the main types of personalization data, because there's a lot, and this is definitely not comprehensive, but you can imagine things like static attributes. So if we want to encode maybe like demographic information, things like age, gender, ethnicity, what is their actual like where do they live? What's their occupation? And then also like item metadata, right? So if you ever like built a project on recommender systems, a lot of times you want to encode, say you're recommending movies, what's the genre? What's the global ratings historically? When was it released? Even things like encoding the title could have useful information. And so that's some examples of static. You also have interaction histories. These are more dynamic, right? So the user's past behaviors, preferences, maybe prior chat history, clicks, views, purchases, etc. It could also be directly like user written text themselves, reviews, comments, posts. And a lot of this is encapsulated on the idea of like a preference, right? So what we're really trying to get to is what is this person, what are they passionate about? What do they like? What do they dislike? What are their interests? What are their priorities? And you can imagine like this is not comprehensive. You can go beyond this. You could even go to more like abstract things like psychographics, like what are their motivational goals? What are their aspirations? Really getting into detail of like their behavioral patterns. And so there's a lot more here that you can kind of store as quote unquote personalized data. And then if you've ever used ChatGPT and sometimes maybe you give it like a harder query, you'll sometimes see it will provide like two different responses and you can pick one that you prefer. That would be an example of like pairwise human preferences. And that would just be like the explicit user feedback on things like preferred response or quality. So just like some examples in the real world, and a lot of this is actually very recent, some of these even in the latest month, is all the different examples. ChatGPT now like trying to remember things so it can personalize responses. And you'll see a lot of this terminology being used around memories. So memories are another like very big terminology of what you might encompass as personalization data, different aspects of personalization data, including it could be like the static attributes as well as like more the dynamic ones, like your interests and your preferences. So if you see it on like ChatGPT in the past couple months, they had this new memory feature. And there's even like a memory management feature, so you can kind of see the kind of things they're recording. So it can be like, yeah, the things that they love to do. They love traveling. What are they interested in? Even things about more like demographic information could be here, familial, like contextual information, like they have a daughter and their daughter likes jellyfish. Gemini AI recently adding like conversational memories, XAI adding memories to personalized feature responses. This was very recent actually. And example here, like, okay, Max is asking for a workout, but based on what they know about Max and like what is his tendencies of what kind of workouts he enjoys, it's able to actually kind of provide a personalized response or a tailored workout plan based on what it knows about the person. Meta AI, another example, personalizing responses with memories, using your Facebook and Instagram data. So this person asked for like a breakfast recipe recommendation, and they gave a generic response, but then they say, I'm vegan though, and then they kind of append and update that as personalization data in the form of a memory that it could then use to kind of retrieve for future like user requests. So just really quickly on a high level, like what are some like techniques for how this actually happens? So the framework we saw on the first slide was like a RAG-based framework, right? So we can incorporate all that information. Maybe the memories of the person are in some kind of external knowledge base. Maybe it's vectorized. And when new information arrives, right, we retrieve it, do some kind of like similarity search, and can actually personalize the output. You can also do it in a simpler way, just via prompting. And this would just be kind of like directly incorporating relevant user context into the prompt. So it would be hidden from the user, but in like maybe the system prompt, that can also personalize the output. You can also do it via what we call representation learning. So this is when you're actually training the model, and you can do something like train the entire model, so full parameter fine tuning, or you can do something a little bit more efficient, like training a subset. And this would be called like parameter efficient fine tuning. There's methods like LoRa, and a lot of this can be useful if you maybe want to train like a smaller language model to get very good at a specific task. And it's also more cost efficient. And you really want to get good like at personalizing certain types of experiences. And then the last one is reinforcement learning from human feedback. And so these are like the explicit signals that you might get from a system, or when you're giving, I prefer this response over that one, you can then encode it as a reward signal to the LLM through reinforcement learning and get better at the task of like some kind of policy, right? So the next thing I want to talk about is another kind of like cool, recent, emergent thing that's been getting a lot of attention, especially in like the research space. So everything we were just talking about kind of like presupposes that you have this really great, high quality sets of data for both like training, evaluation, but a lot of times you can run into some kind of limitations of using real world data. And so one of the great kind of emergent abilities of LLMs and something you might call like anthropomorphic cognition. And all I mean by that is like how good these LLMs are getting at like simulating human likeness, generating like human-like responses, There's new models, chain of thought, like reasoning models every few months, it feels like, and they're just getting better and better. Is that like synthetic data generation is a very cool way to sort of like harness these emergent abilities to generate data sets for specific use cases that can then be used to like further augment all the things you're previously talking about, right? So personalization use cases, if you want to fine tune an LLM for a specific task, you can generate more synthetic data to kind of create a more well curated, diverse, or robust data set for a lot of those use cases. And there's also still a lot of limitations on just using real data directly. So there's things like data scarcity, right? It's a long-standing problem, especially in like traditional ML. The quality of your model is going to depend on the quality of your data. There's also a lot of like things around privacy constraints, right? As you can imagine, all the things we're talking about like what do we actually store about users? It's all extremely personal information, right? Users have to maybe opt in when you're training models on real personal user data. There's a lot of restrictions at big companies on making sure you do that in the right way. Sometimes they may just say, legally, we can't do this. We can't train a model on this data. It's too sensitive. But there's a lot of barriers. And a lot of times when you want to move quickly and still like train models and have a positive impact on customers, you'll run into like these types of constraints. And synthetic data sort of amends all of that because you can, well, it's synthetically generated and also you can anonymize and create workarounds to kind of address those concerns. And the other thing is just like a lot of the costs and time associated with if you want to have really high quality like annotated data from like real human people, that's just a very time consuming and high cost process. And synthetic data generation can be used for annotation as well. So some of the main components and some examples of synthetic data generation is really like prompt engineering. So one of the key things here is like knowledge enrichment. It can also include things like role playing as personas, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But one example of like knowledge enrichment is like this paper I think came from our neighbors at like the Allen Institute and like UW, I think, and this is like social common sense distillation. And what they're doing, instead of just prompting naively, you can kind of enrich your prompt with more relevant information by like retrieving or sampling from an external knowledge graph. So they took like an external knowledge graph of different topics, different conversation topics, and they like retrieve a triplet and then they add it to the prompt and it improves the quality of the response or like if you were generating synthetic dialogues. Personas are another very interesting kind of like synthetically generated construct where you can basically try to simulate descriptions of people or the core attributes of people. So an example of that would be this paper where they kind of web crawled like a bunch of text and then they kind of used LLMs to compress that knowledge into like distilled persona summaries that kind of capture the main dimensions of different, you might argue, like archetypes of people. So like a mathematician, a scientist, an athlete, or a musician. And then from that, you can add those personas to your prompt when generating, conditioned upon that to get even higher fidelity, more realistic, more diverse outputs. And so they actually generated like a billion, and they have like released publicly available on their GitHub like I think several hundred million personas, and these are like yeah very concise, distilled like natural language summaries about different types of occupations of people, kind of sourced from real world web text data. Another important dimension here is like in context learning. So all we mean by that is if you want to add like few shot high quality examples into your prompt, this really kind of facilitates the LLM's ability to learn when generating responses. And it kind of serves as a form of like implicit human guidance. So you can see this kind of example in the bottom right would be an example of few short examples. In this paper, they kind of found that even getting as small as like 10 to 15 really high quality expert written examples that kind of mirror the format of what they're trying to produce and adding it to the prompt as input. They like sample from a golden collection of expert written examples. You can find improvements to things like the realism of the data that's generated in the synthetic dialogues or the diversity, right? So these are just a couple examples. A few more. Generation can happen in one shot, or you can do it in multiple steps. There's also this related idea of chain of thought reasoning. So all that means is you instruct the LLM in the prompt to think step by step before generating its response. And you can get even fancier by kind of doing more detailed, different variations of thinking streams. You might ask the LLM to critique its own output before generating the final output. You might ask the LLM to sort of like just reason open monologue. So there's some examples there that can also be very interesting to experiment with when you're generating synthetic data. There's also this idea of like data curation. So all the data you generate, it might not be up to your standard. And so how do you like post-process? How do you filter? How you clean it? You can use different metrics and then kind of create a filtered subset from your original generated data and enhance it in that way. And then a very important dimension, the last one is like data evaluation, right? So there's two main like ways to decompose it. It would be like indirect and direct. So direct evaluation just refers to like any metrics on the data set itself. So this could be things like data diversity. You could look at like lexical diversity metrics, n-gram statistics, vocabulary statistics. You could also look at things like sample relevance. So how diverse is your data? You can maybe kind of like embed the responses and then look at the similarity between different responses and elements of your data set to see like the space you're kind of covering. And then the other way would be indirect evals. This could be things like if you're going to fine tune a model that's downstream for a different task using a synthetic data set. You can just kind of indirectly evaluate based on the metrics of the downstream model. So this could be things like doing a classification model, the downstream precision and recall, or it could be human evaluation on your downstream models, kind of key metrics and responses. Kind of related and going a little bit more into personas. Another very cool kind of recent thing that's getting more attention is this idea of like persona-oriented role-playing language agents. And all this really means is kind of like taking the personas that we talked about a little bit ago and using LLMs to really kind of condition upon that and generate responses that are faithful to that original input. So it kind of leverages these things that are very powerful for LLMs that we kind of touched on. So in context learning, instruction following, distilling social intelligence, and we're really seeing like our RPLAs are achieving a remarkable sense of like being able to simulate real people. And this is very closely tied to personalization, right? Because if we can do different simulations and build language agents that sort of reflect inherent capabilities of realistic people, it offers different ways to train, generate more synthetic data at scale, or even evaluate in different simulations. And yeah, different ways to train. You can do pre-training, you can do SFT or instruction fine-tuning, reinforcement learning, or you can just do non-parametric prompting, kind of incorporating and conditioning upon maybe some set of inputs like persona attributes, and then adding role-playing instructions to kind of take advantage of like instruction following abilities of LLMs in the context itself. So some kind of examples quickly on different types of like personas or RPLAs. You could have it at a level of demographic persona. And we're talking about here is like if we were to describe a different groups of people, different archetypes of people, maybe like different types of experts, different types of occupations, or even things like personality traits. You can do personas at that level. You can also do it for characters. Something kind of cool is you've seen a lot of different research papers trying to like simulate different historical figures like Napoleon or different famous philosophers or even fictional characters, right? Um, and the third one is like if you really want to get to like an individualized persona, and this can be like an ever-evolving profile. It's going to have its own like memory bank that it could be linked to in the background. And for this, it's really to train like different language agents that can, as you can see, like personalizing a response based on what they know about you and who you are, And it also allows for even more personalized specific agents. So if you ever use like a shopping agent, or if you use Amazon Rufus, or if you want to like have a traveling agent to help you like pick the perfect destination, it can really be a more individualized case. So there's different like granularities of personas, and there's a lot of cool examples that we've seen in research. So just a couple like more examples. If you ever use like Character AI, it's a really cool company that's like focusing on more of like the character level persona. So here's like a one example chat where you can like pick different like preset RPLAs. This one's on like Gandalf, and you can kind of ask it, and you'll see that it's been probably like pre-trained on like some kind of corpus of like, I don't know, all of the text that we have on, related to Gandalf or other like movie script items, perhaps. And it's sort of like role playing as this fictitious character. On the left, we have another example of like using RPLAs for like user behavior simulation. So this was a kind of cute paper out of Stanford where they actually built like a little web app where they kind of created persona descriptions, and then they had like a memory system behind it where you can have like different simulations of little avatars walking around and going throughout their day and kind of having conversations with each other. So just a few kind of examples of like that. So in the next section, I'm just going to talk a little bit about more of my experience working at Amazon as a data scientist, Amazon's culture, leadership principles, the different types of data roles at Amazon, some of the expectations, and then ending with some tips, reflections, and lessons learned. So Amazon's culture, we have our set of leadership principles, things like customer obsession, ownership. These are the things that they will really be looking for if you're interviewing at the company, when you're working at the company. These are kind of like the main dimensions that you're evaluated across. And kind of one interesting book that is a little bit outdated. So it was back when we had 14. We have a couple more added on since then. Is called The Amazon Way, where it's written by somebody who kind of like went through the leadership principles and really tried to tie it to like the company's history and pull out the main insights across each of the main leadership principles. So if you are interested in sort of like interviewing at Amazon or joining Amazon or even just learning more about the culture, I would highly recommend that book to get a better understanding of like a more nuanced understanding of what the leadership principle means and maybe how it originated. Um, and just like a quick interview tip for the behavioral portion is to really like understand each of the leadership principles and then actually maybe even tie specific, star format examples for each one. And I think that was very helpful for me. And I think like they're really going to be looking across those dimensions. And Amazon does kind of care a lot about the behavioral aspect of the interview and basically how good of a fit you are for the culture. Just a couple examples that I liked from this book, but yeah, since the inception of the company, I think this is from like the very first shareholder letter um, from Bezos in like 1997, but it's been all about offering customers compelling value. So that's something intrinsically embedded in the history of the company is this idea of like customer obsession. Another leadership principle is like ownership. So kind of the ability to say like, yes, like it's my job, I can do it versus like, that's not my job. Really kind of going above and beyond your role expectations to sort of like see where you can even have and drive a higher impact. Another leadership principle is really about like learn and be curious. So everybody has this sort of idea to really question like asking why multiple times to a relentless degree. And that's also something that like I would say is particularly important for the data scientist role. Um, Another leadership principle example is like bias for action. So Amazon has a culture of moving very fast. That's kind of encapsulated in this quote. If you double the number of experiments you do per year, you're going to double the number of learnings you have. You're going to double your inventiveness. And then another example is are right a lot. And I like this quote, people who are right a lot, they seem to disconfirm their most profoundly held convictions. And the idea there is that you're really not sort of stuck in your own um, ways. You're open-minded You kind of question your first principles, and you really try to seek what is true, what is data driven, instead of maybe your initial intuitions that could be wrong, or doing things that are beneficial to you rather than the overall project. Quick overview of some of the different types of roles, data roles at Amazon. So there's a lot. There's business analyst, there's business intelligence engineer, there's also data engineer, data scientist, research scientist, economist, applied scientist. The economist, you might focus more on things closer to econometrics and things even like causal inference. Applied scientists are sort of like a blend of like data scientists and SDE. So they actually have like, they should be held to like an SDE coding bar. Research scientist is kind of like applied scientist, but without the SDE coding bar. Um, Data engineering is more like, yeah, software engineering best practices, but for maintaining databases, doing it in an efficient way. BI engineer is more around like metrics, ETL tooling, um, building data pipelines. And then business analyst is very similar to business intelligence engineer. You're going to be doing a lot more traditional analytics. You're going to be doing things ranging from writing ad hoc analyses, driving insights into what's impacting key metrics. You can also be doing ETL reporting as well. So there's a lot of overlap between roles. And I'll make a point out that at Amazon, role changes are possible. So kind of related to the idea of like ownership and that leadership principle, a lot of times you'll see that people's roles, although they have clear definitions internally and general guidelines, you can be given projects and things to work on that are not within your immediate or traditional role guidelines. I've seen that a lot. And there's an internal formal process if you want to change roles. So maybe you're, starting as a BI engineer or business analyst, you want to transition to data engineer or transition to data scientist. I think one of the great things about Amazon is that you'll get lots of opportunities because there's a never-ending backlog of things to do, to work on projects that are beyond your original scope. So I would say maybe don't index too much on like, especially if you're a recent graduate and you're looking for your first role. It doesn't have to be like your perfect dream role from the get-go. I think there's a lot of value, and an underrated approach is to kind of just get your foot in the door, gain the experience, begin earning trust. Um, as you do that, right, you'll learn more about the business, the team, the key metrics, you'll get more domain knowledge, and it gives you a great opportunity within to like expand your scope to more projects. So working on a data science project, for example, and then you can kind of create artifacts, projects, show your impact, and try to do things like transitions. So yeah, and then more on the data scientist role specifically at Amazon. It is more of a generalist role. So you'll do analysis of complex data sets up to the billions of, record scale, Amazon scale data. You'll be working on scientific research projects. You'll do a lot of EDA analyses, data insights. You'll try to be building scalable models and algorithms. The main tooling really is Python, R, SQL, and of course like AWS and everything like EC2, S3, EMR, and all the tools that are related to the AWS ecosystem, which you'll learn as you work and gain experience. And then they have these general qualifications that you might see when you're like applying for jobs. I wouldn't index on that too much. I definitely didn't have 3 years of experience when I transitioned into the role. So I wouldn't say like, oh, I have to have a PhD or like a master's degree to apply. I think that if you can showcase, strong related experience and you have relevant projects, maybe linked to your resume, I wouldn't index too much on like disqualifying yourself based on general qualifications. And yeah, the other thing I'll just touch on a little bit more is on this idea of like a generalist role. So a lot of these terms like analyst or data scientist are really broadly defined and generic terms, and there's a lot of gray areas. And so like at one company, business analyst or data scientist might mean something completely different from another company. At Amazon, I think a lot of the lines are blurred, and you'll kind of just be working on whatever the highest impact thing your manager wants you to work on is. And so again, like trying to echo this idea that you'll be given a lot of opportunities, kind of work on different projects beyond your current role, beyond your current scope. And I wouldn't say like um, anything, although there's internal guidelines, anything that's clearly defined in one role or another means that that's the only thing that you will be doing, which kind of entails like another key point that I want to highlight is I think one of the most important parts, or maybe leadership principles or core things to be thinking about is like your ability to learn constantly. So, data scientists, you could be doing ad hoc analyses. You might be doing like experimentation with like A/B testing or hypothesis testing, statistical inference stuff. You might be want to do like time series forecasting, anomaly detection, um, causal inference, maybe more traditional machine learning, like building a classification model, deep learning, LLMs. So there's so many like subjects, and it's so widely defined that I would just say like don't be overwhelmed and thinking like you have to know everything about everything before you're interviewing or before you're interested in trying to join in this role. But really, it's sort of like your inherent ability to learn quickly, learn on the job, and sort of enjoy that process. As you get a new project, I think that's an invaluable skill. And then just to conclude, just some like final tips, reflections, and lesson learned. If I had to distill maybe like the two key dimensions, um, it sounds very like stupidly simple, but just like hard work and having a good attitude. I think there's a lot kind of embedded within that. So I'll maybe try to expand a bit. But I think like, yeah, kind of like tying to like the idea of like your willingness to learn and dive in, even if you don't know everything, right? You're not an expert in this new project or the related methodologies behind it, but you have a positive attitude, sort of like a can-do attitude to like, I'm gonna dive in, I'm gonna do my best, I'm gonna learn as much as I can. Um, that counts for a lot. Um, Related to all of that is like thinking and asking yourself like what is important to you personally. Um, like what are the things that you value? What are like the intrinsic first principles of how you want to orient your mind that directly feeds into your attitude, right? It directly shapes your perceptions, and your perceptions shape like your actual experience of your own reality. So, if you just are somebody who's, really hard on yourself or really negative, it can quickly, I think, you become your own worst enemy. So a lot of it's kind of getting out of your own way. Um, there's several videos where like people ask the CEO of Amazon like what is your number one tip, and I've seen him like echo this idea of like having a good attitude numerous times. And I think like just personally reflecting, it would be one of the biggest things that I'll also take away. We kind of already touched around constantly be learning, freedom from outcome. There are things that are not in your control, right? And so really focusing your energy on, what do you have agency to actually do, and not worrying about things that are external to that. So maybe an example is if you're interviewing. I know I've talked to, several anecdotes from students, and right now, the field is very saturated. It's sometimes feels, a lot of personal anecdotes I've heard about people that are getting discouraged. And I would just say, like, if you focus on your own process, your own inputs, you're constantly learning from your interview experiences. You could have done a lot of things right, and it comes down to an external hiring manager decision, and you could have been excellent, and they just pick somebody maybe who had more experience or was a better fit for that specific role. I wouldn't worry about those things that you can't control, but rather kind of enjoying the current process. Um, Another point is sort of advocating for your own work. So this is something that I definitely wasn't very good on, but I was very lucky to have a super supportive manager who kind of really understood the value of doing this. Um, you don't want to just kind of work in your own silo and then drive impact and do all this hard work and never sort of share that with the broader team, the broader org even. Um, these are the artifacts and little snippets that will help you if you want to like transition to a new role, if you ever want to work towards a promotion. These are sort of like the ways you kind of build that rapport across populating what you did, the hard work you did, and really kind of thinking about how you do need to share that. And if you're somebody, I get there are some people who just like personally, that's a little bit more uncomfortable for them to do. You don't want to feel like you're bragging about everything. Look at everything I did. And so, really, just having to understanding that you're sharing what you did. This could be beneficial to other teams. They could learn from the work you did. They could then have new ideas to build off the work you did and collaborate further. So, it's really just a win-win situation for everybody. Um, the next point is like, what is work-life balance? So I get a lot of people, coffee chats or LinkedIn messages really asking about like, how is work-life balance at Amazon? And I would just say that Amazon's culture in general really does have like that leadership principle, right, of moving really fast, bias for action. And so everybody works really hard. I think Amazon's a big company, so depending on the team and the org you're in, there's definitely variation across this. At AGI org specifically, I think a lot of this bias for action is heightened just because of how competitive this space we're in is and how quickly it's moving, and everybody's fighting to win, right? And we're competing with tech companies and different startups that are working long hours, and so like it really depends, and it's really coming down to like a personal question to you that you should spend some time thinking about. There's no one right answer across all people, but work-life balance can mean different things to different people, and kind of reflecting on maybe if Amazon or certain um, organizations are a good fit for you, it's something that you also want to try to have some kind of personal answer to. Um, the next point, yeah, communication is, in my opinion, just as important as your technical skills. These are sort of also like the intangible things, like how do you actually communicate technical work in a way that anybody can understand? Written communication. So can you document your work in a way where like catered working backwards from the audience who's going to read it? Maybe it's product managers, they don't know all the algorithms or details of that. Can you still convey the key message um, concisely, right? And writing high quality documentation, I think, is something that I think is very important. I think there's a little difference between clear thinking and clear writing. And when you can kind of create those artifacts, it really sort of helps everybody who maybe doesn't have as much context. They can come in and quickly get up to speed. They can see your methodology. They can see the impact of your work. And also, when you write high quality documentation, those things also become the artifacts that are considered when you want to go for a role change, when you want to go for a promotion, right? That those are the pieces of evidence. And so it's really important to not just do great technical work, but also make sure that you're sort of writing high quality documentation to support that. And then just more on the last point, just be someone people enjoy working with. And that's also tied to like how you communicate in meetings. Are you somebody who people would want to work with longer term versus are you somebody who's being very negative and maybe not as open to helping other people or brainstorming new ideas? And kind of remembering like when you're interviewing, right? I know there's so much like thinking about all the technical things you have to do, like practicing leak code or like knowing the answers to different like ML questions. And just don't forget that when you're in an interview, you're talking to like another human being, and they're going to be either explicitly or implicitly and subconsciously evaluating like, is this somebody who I'd like to work with day to day? And are they somebody who I would enjoy like spending and being in the trenches with longer term? So yeah, that concludes presentation. Thanks so much, and we can open up to any questions.
Thank you so much. That was an awesome talk. I learned a lot. You guys can either unmute your mic or put the questions in the chat. This is a great time to ask questions about what he talked about, anything about his career journey. Yeah.
Um, Now my question is what is Amazon research priorities? Since you're also like working on like AGI side, like what is Amazon like approach towards AGI? Is it like more data, like better ha hardwares, or like is it like are you guys approaching with the new like technical like techniques, like let's say like symbolic AI or neuromorphics? Like what is you guys like research priorities and like approach towards AGI?
Yeah. I think that there's so many people and so many different teams and initiatives working on AGI, and it's such a broad field that the answer is probably everything. We have teams kind of working on like Nova models, if you've heard about those. That's Amazon's like in-house like large language model variants. They release like nova.amazon.com, which is kind of like Amazon AGI's version of ChatGPT. There's a team like we acquired a startup recently that's working on like operator models or our own version of that. There's teams on AWS side more on like Bedrock that's working on like providing different tools to be available to everybody. So they have ways to do like batch inference requests when you're doing inferencing from LLMs, um, how to host and kind of call like our Nova models at scale. They even have ways to like host your own custom fine-tuned models. So yeah, there's a lot. Our team, the key priorities are, personalization of LLMs, right? And how can we learn or generate the data that we need to kind of create these tailored systems to get better at, all the different examples we kind of touched on, like personalizing responses. So yeah,
So like you guys are in a experimenting everything technically. Thank you.
I think we have a few questions in the chat.
oh, okay. How to find on LinkedIn. Oh, I should have, yeah. You search just Doug Kong, Amazon, LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with anybody. I will call out that I do get a lot of people kind of messaging me on LinkedIn and asking for coffee chats. So my response time might be a little bit variable. But you should say like if you're from DubsTech and like, hey, I go to UW, or then I will definitely try to respond to your message. So I'm happy to connect with anybody. Do a coffee chat if you want to learn more about any of these specific things, or if you have other questions. Um, yeah. Thanks for linking it. How do you keep up with the ever-changing world of AI? Um, I really like starting with like survey papers, because there's just so much research that's being populated in any of these kind of things we touched on. Like there's so many papers coming out around like personalization or um, synthetic data generation even or personas and RPLAs. And so like it's hard to maybe start from like reading like a dozen different papers all at once. So I like to maybe start by looking at like trying to find the best survey paper on a certain topic, and then starting there, getting a sense of like the landscape. And then if you find more interesting papers within that, like then you can kind of go deeper.
Hi. This question is like kind of follow-up of your answer is like how do you like show that like you know like those skills that you have read about in your papers? Like how do you make projects that just basically tell to the recruiters that oh I know these stuff?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. Like I would just say, hopefully like when we covered all the different examples and briefly like surveyed all the different things, hopefully maybe some of that like inspired you on maybe different project ideas that you could build yourself. So maybe you want to try to generate your own synthetic data, build your own personas, instruction fine tune or train a model or an LLM for a specific task. Maybe you want to go more into the things we didn't go in as much depth on, like explore reinforcement learning or explore things like, um, yeah, like there's just like a thousand different ideas. And I would say the best thing to do is to pick one that's very interesting to you and then just try to start building a project. And even better is if you could write up maybe like some nice documentation to accompany whatever you did, put it on GitHub, and then I think right now is a very exciting time to be building and learning. You can use LLMs to help you learn as well. So, any question you have about the process, there's now is really the best time to kind of like dive deep and learn as much as you can. It's kind of crazy to say like back in my day, a couple years ago, we didn't even have LLMs when I was in college at the scale of like the Chat GPT and all of that craze. And so um, I think, yeah, LLMs are also so great for like learning that I think you can kind of take advantage of that and try to build a really cool project that is interesting to you in any number of these ideas, and then documenting that experience, right? Because I think a related question is like, how can you get experience if you don't have any experience? And projects, your own personal projects, is a fantastic way to do that. Um, Other examples would be like be a teaching assistant for a class that's maybe more related to, doesn't have to be AI, but anything you're interested in. Go be a research assistant. Um, there's a ton of AI research happening at UW and probably like more NLP focus groups, LLM focus groups. Um, Find maybe a graduate student or a professor that is working on research that you are interested in, try to help them. Maybe you could even get your name on a paper, right? So, another one would be like volunteering. Volunteering is a great way as well because a lot of times the bar to get a volunteering opportunity is much lower because you're offering your services to other people. And so maybe there's an opportunity to volunteer in a space tangential to what you're interested in. So those would be just some things that come to mind on how to like gain experience in this space, but also more broadly other spaces. Um, if you don't have like traditional work or internship experience. Cool. I see we're getting close to time, but any other final questions? All
Um,
right. If not, yeah.
Sorry, I was just gonna ask, like, how often do you use things like ChatGPT and like I don't know, other AI, DeepSeek to like learn yourself in jobs, in your job, like day-to-day life?
All the time. So yeah. So Amazon has close ties to Anthropic. So we use Claude internally, and we have versions that are like you can use it with confidential data even. So I will constantly be brainstorming and using Claude to like check my assumptions, learn about different papers or new methodologies. So I think if you're not doing that, then you're doing yourself a disservice just because of how great these tools are becoming. And so, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Any more questions? If not, thank you so much. That was an amazing talk. I have recorded it and I will send out those recordings. And yeah,
All
thank
right. Thanks.
of
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Rita, for organizing.
course.
Awesome.
Thank you.